Pretty cool. It sure is in progress. That's great. Okay. Excellent. With that, welcome everybody. We're thrilled to have you here for the first of three sessions that kicks off our fall adult ed series. I have made some handouts for folks in the room because some people like to actually see paper and not screens. Although I'm going to try to stand by the screen. Unfortunately, for the folks on the Zoom, I cannot actually give you any paper, but yeah, but I think we're going to be good here. All right. Welcome to one and all. I don't know if anybody from our adult ed committee has any announcements that they want to kind of start off with. Any adult ed announcements? I see Dave shaking his head. Be here next week. That's right. Three times in a row. That's right. And the question that's been asked is whether these sessions are going to be recorded. And so I have just hit record. We're going to make a habit and hopefully continue to do this of recording as much adult ed as we can and uploading it to our Temple Isaiah YouTube channel, which we've got lots and lots of great content on. And we sent out last week or the week before the best of the high holidays. It's like that's like Air Supply's greatest hits. It's like it's exactly the same, but but slightly different. So so it's great to be here tonight, and this three session course really arises out of the request of the Adult Ed Committee. So it's nice to actually be responsive too, um, and uh, and to say there were a whole bunch of topics that were put up here. So if this was your topic, you're welcome. And for everyone else, you signed up, and so you're probably interested enough to show up here tonight and to spend some time on this topic. We're going to start, and we certainly are going to do a bit of Torah study tonight with the blessing over sacred study, which ends la'asok b'divrei Torah. God, you have made it a mitzvah to be engaged in words of Torah. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam asher kitshanu b'mitzvotav v'tzivanu la'asok b'divrei Torah. So great to have folks here. I'm going to silence my cell phone too, otherwise you'll hear everybody coming in. Oh, rain is expected, by the way, just so you know. Um, Starting around 1 a.m. That's what Alexa tells me. So this three-session course responded to the interest that people had in learning about Hasidic Judaism, Hasidism. You only would use the word Hasidism, by the way, if you were writing an academic paper. But like some people call it Hasidic Judaism, some in Hebrew Hasidut. And I want to start because we did decide to do a three-part approach, myself, then Rabbi Plotkin, then Rabbi Weiss, by taking three individuals from the very beginning, somewhat into, and more recent individuals, charismatic, important teachers in Hasidut, and to make that really the structure of the course. But I thought that it was important tonight to start with the question of Hasidut, of what this discipline is. So that's a big, bold question. What do you think when you think about Hasidism or Hasidut or Hasidic Judaism? What words or phrases jump into your mind, Gary? Joy. Okay, great. Okay. Klezmer. Okay, you were at the Renaissance anyway. So klezmer music. We hear klezmer music. Joy. What else? Mystical. And by the way, folks on the Zoom, you are more than welcome to unmute yourself and to participate actively. We can hear you in the room, and you will not mess up anything. So yeah. Orthodox. So okay, so a word orthodox with Hasidic. Okay, great. Others with words that they associate with Hasidut. Spiritual. Okay, great. Anybody else with the following all the laws? Great. Old fashioned. By the way, I should have clarified it at first. They don't all have to be positive associations. Now, You may like a good old fashioned, but old fashioned also might be your thing. But old fashioned is it's a judgmental term. But again, totally valid to say words that are not uh, in praise of. Yeah, strict. Okay, extroverted. Okay, great. An interesting thought. Extroverted. Great. Dancing. Okay, great. Dancing with the Torah. I always say when people come into the office or when people bring pictures of happy Hasidic guys, men dancing with the Torah scroll, right? And I say in every single Reform synagogue I've ever seen, there are pictures of happy Hasidic men dancing with the Torah scroll, which makes me wonder whether or not in a Hasidic synagogue if they would have like pictures of happy Reform women dancing with the Torah scroll, and yeah. Anyway, so yeah, but nonetheless, I have some of those pictures as well. Deborah, certain styles of dress. Okay, great, good. Large parties, styles of dress. Great. Jewish with feeling, neo-Hasidic. Yep, Maryland. Outreach. Okay, great. So awesome. Great. All of these have been, as far as I'm concerned, at least somewhat on the mark about Hasidic Judaism, in part because Hasidic Judaism is a very, very broad subject. So I just kind of wanted to, huh? So long as it actually goes. No, now I have to move over there. There we go. No, come on. You got to let me do that. Oh, screen share. What are you doing with me now? There we go. Okay. It's taking a little bit of time. It's fine. It's good. There's not a lot of slides today. So Hasidut. So I would say spiritual movement of Judaism. It arises really at the very early 18th century, arising in Eastern Europe, Poland, Ukraine, the areas around there, and it becomes from what we're going to study tonight really a diverse, varied set of communities, sects, dynasties, families, geographic locations that are no longer in the geography that they originally are told of, and so there are all kinds of ways that Hasidic Judaism manifests today. It is generally, although not exclusively, tied to a charismatic figure, to the Rebbe, generally called the Rebbe. By the way, Menachem Mendel Schneerson was not the only Rebbe. If you are of a different sect of Hasidic Judaism, you may have your own Rebbe. Rebbe, by the way, is different from a rabbi. I might be a rabbi, but I ain't no Rebbe. And that goes double for Rabbi Weiss. But the Rebbe is a central charismatic figure, sometimes taking on supernatural characteristics. Again, mitzvot with joy. Many people identify Hasidic Judaism, even sometimes Hasidic Judaism identifies itself as a simple faith, right? It's a faith of the simple, pious individual. And that, by the way, is a great cover story for something that is actually extraordinarily deep, in part because Hasidic Judaism, from its outset, is based deeply on Lurianic Kabbalah, on Jewish mysticism, a much, much earlier mystical tradition. And Hasidut will take elements of Lurianic Kabbalah and jettison some other elements of it and make up its own thoughts. And so there is a lot of complex thought at the heart of Hasidic Judaism, even though its outward packaging is generally communicated as something of simplicity, right? This is the simple man's faith. And by the way, it is often a very, very male-dominated conversation. So most of the texts that we're going to use tonight are not the way that I would typically present them, but using male God language. And there are no women. Well, there's one woman mentioned actually in our text tonight, and she's fairly important. But the Hasidic world, while on the one hand it can't only be men because that's a great way to ensure that you will die off. Men are usually at the fore, and women are usually at the back in the Hasidic world. Um, and uh, and on the one hand, the way in which we experience Hasidic Judaism in the world today is very largely focused on the idea of bringing about the Messiah, of Mashiach. That is almost entirely the result of the efforts of Chabad Lubavitch Judaism. And just peeking out to see if there was somebody ringing the doorbell. There's not. That's okay. I'm hearing the unfamiliar sound of a vacuum cleaner. It's okay. It's all good. It's all good. Okay. Okay. um, and Chabad is a Hasidic sect. It becomes in recent times extraordinarily heavily focused on the idea of bringing about Messiah. We're going to see in a moment. Actually, that is a substantial departure, actually, from the initial thrust of Hasidic Judaism. So, but because Chabad is without a doubt by numbers the most successful Hasidic movement in history, and in the modern world, it is without a doubt the most omnipresent. Some in the Hasidic world would make the argument that Chabad are now something other than Hasidic Judaism, that they're actually like a completely different sect. And I don't know that that's necessarily untrue, but they certainly come out of Hasidic Judaism. Great. Pausing there before we get individual and personal about it for questions, comments, or thoughts. Was there a question in the Zoom? And by the way, just so folks know in the Zoom, the screen, because of the short HDMI cord, is behind me, and so therefore I can't actually see it. And so if you have a question, I beg of you, just unmute yourself and stop me in my tracks. Cool? So with that, like I said, we're going to get individual and personal because we are rolling it back to the OG, the original gangsta of the original Hasid, this gentle-looking guy, Israel ben Eliezer, better known as the Baal Shem Tov or the Besht. And this is really the starting point of Hasidic Judaism. He doesn't intend, by the way, in any sense, to start something itself. But the Baal Shem Tov, master of a good name, when you take those letters and you condense them down into what we call Rashi Tevot, or an abbreviation, Besht, Bet, Ayin, Shin, Tet. I'll pivot between Besht and Baal Shem Tov. It would be unlikely to hear anyone really refer to him as Israel ben Eliezer today, again, except in academic sources. However, the Encyclopedia Judaica really confused me because they put his listing as Israel ben Eliezer. I was like, that doesn't make any sense. Who even knows what the guy's first name is? His name is the Baal Shem Tov. So, great. Born around 1700, dies around 1760. The truth is, we don't actually know all that much about his birth, and we really don't know all that much about his death. For somebody who was, in his own day and age, extraordinarily famous, the details are very, very sketchy. And it's not like the 1700s weren't a time of history. They were a time of history. People wrote down histories. People thought that that was very important. The Besht is a little bit shrouded in mystery. Additionally, though this is one of the most common images that you'll see associated with the Baal Shem Tov, and it's the only image of him that I'm going to use tonight, there are no contemporary portraits of him. There are several portraits of other individuals who were also named Baal Shem, which just means master of a name, right? Nobody else was named the Baal Shem Tov, but there were other individuals named the Baal Shem, right? And several of those are frequently misattributed. Even a photograph that is misattributed as an actual photograph of the Baal Shem Tov in the 1700s. So again, thank you. It would be unusual or impossible. So so the Baal Shem Tov, 1700 to 1760, he's born in a small town. Nobody's completely sure exactly where it is, but it's somewhere in Poland, Lithuania, in Poland, Ukraine. He dies in Mezibo, which is a town that becomes very, very important to the Hasidic movement. We're going to see at the very end the location of his grave there and what that's become. Like many extraordinary individuals, his birth is shrouded in a mysterious wonder story. His parents were very old. They were very old. They were so old. How old were they? They were both around 100 years old when he was born. Like Abraham and Sarah, what a wonderful observation, right? Wouldn't it make sense? Abraham and Sarah, that's fine. In fact, we don't know what his mother's name was for sure. He's Israel ben Eliezer. We know his father's name, but people assume his mother's name was Sarah. Maybe for that reason as well, by the way. So there's this association. His parents were 100 years old. He's an only child. An only child in those days? Seriously, what a shanda for them. Anyway, but so he's an only child to elderly parents who are then perhaps enslaved, perhaps arrested, but however it winds up, Israel ben Eliezer becomes an orphan at a very young age. And the stories that are told about him say that he goes and he becomes like basically a remedial tutor in a cheder, a behelfer. He's like, he's working with bar mitzvah kids, maybe something like that. And he spends some time doing that. He spends some time as the shomer in a synagogue. He's, effectively straightening up the chairs, sleeping there at night, making sure nobody messes with the synagogue. He is married fairly young, as most folks were at that time. His first wife dies very, very soon after their wedding. Together with his second wife, he moves out into the mountains, and that becomes like a very important phase of the Baal Shem Tov's life. Baal Shem Tov moves out into the Carpathian Mountains. The story is that he used to make money, he would dig clay. And his wife would sell the clay in the marketplace. So picture this guy out there, like just trying to get all the clay out of the ground, and then she starts an inn, and he starts helping out at the inn. Basically, here we are. They come down out of the mountains. They settle in a town called Tlust. They have two children, one son, one daughter, Tzvi and Adol. And their son and their daughter are the only children that we know about for Baal Shem Tov. And eventually, during that time when he's come down out of the mountains, his time in the mountains was a time that's kind of seen as a spiritual revelatory time where he discovers mysterious and wondrous powers. Powers to heal individuals, powers to interpret dreams, or actually to speak directly with the dead. He has mysterious powers, is kind of the story that he comes down out of the mountains with. It's said that he spent most of his time out in the mountains when he wasn't digging clay, meditating, dancing, praying, basically a real out-of-the-box experience out in the mountains. So, and we'll get a story about his time in the mountains in a moment as well. He and his wife do settle in Mezebah. I have no idea how to say it, by the way. I think I'm saying it right. Mezebah. I gotta ask somebody. Somebody will. But you know what? 3 Jews are going to tell me 4 pronunciations, right? But that becomes really his town for the rest of his life. 1740 to about 1760, he's living in a much larger Jewish community, and it's really around that time in the last 30 to really the last 20 years of his life that he begins to truly attract Hasidim. He begins to attract followers, those who see him as some kind of a special individual. And his name and his reputation gets spread around. Simultaneous to that, by the way, he also faces lots of opposition. There are those who think that what he's doing is wrong. There are those who think that he is not a great Torah scholar, and so how can he be a religious leader? And the truth is, he was not a great Talmud scholar. And most of his contemporaries would say that he really did not actually have a mastery of Talmud, of halacha, of Jewish law. He was actually a great Torah scholar in the sense that his commentaries, or the commentaries that are attributed to him, on the various parashiot, on anything in the Hebrew Bible, are actually quite brilliant. And it's clear that he had a great mastery of Tanakh, and perhaps didn't care that much actually about Talmud, which makes me associate with him because I've sort of put myself in that category as well. Bless you. This becomes an important piece of the Hasidic movement, is the idea of discipleship, of the notion that you're going to have individuals who come after you. Not necessarily, although in some cases it is the case, are you born into Hasidic royalty. So there are dynasties where the Rebbe position has passed from father to son, to son, to son, to son, right? But that is not necessarily the case. Much more so, you might have a primary student or a group of primary students. And so the Baal Shem Tov has a number of followers who come after him, who are important in their own rights. Yaakov Yosef, rather, the Maggid of Mezrich, who is maybe his most important or most influential disciple. He has a rabbinic grandson who comes to be known, and oftentimes people are called by their principal work that they leave behind. So Degel Machane Ephraim is the primary book of Moses Chaim Ephraim of Sudlikov, who is one of the Baal Shem Tov's grandsons. Nachum Tversky, and that becomes the line of the Twersky family that a lot of people still know today. Still a very, very important Hasidic family. Abraham Twersky, Hasidic rabbi and physician, brilliant author, and all of those things. So that's the Twersky family. The Meor Enayim, the one who opens up eyes or brings light to eyes. That's, nobody would necessarily know him as Nachum Tversky of Chernobyl. It doesn't have a good sound to it today, right? But the Meor Enayim, people would recognize in the Hasidic world. You'd say like, well, the Meor Enayim said blah, 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 blah. So his grandson, Nachman of Bratslav, who is going to be the subject next week, Rabbi Plotkin will be teaching on Nachman of Bratslav, and his other grandson, who maybe in his own day, immediately in his own day, was even more important, was Baruch of Mezrich, who stays in the town itself. Baruch, by the way, by most of the family lineages, all three grandsons that we've just spoken about are grandsons who come through the line of Udal, his daughter, right? So his daughter's children become actually quite famous and quite well known. It is possible that Baruch is actually the son of his daughter married to the daughter of his son. So, it's a small town, it happens. So in which case, Baruch has double yichus. I meet people every once in a while who tell me that they are descendants of the Baal Shem Tov, right? One son and one daughter, right? But I meet people all over the place who say, well, I'm from the line of the Baal Shem Tov. There is actually a whole website for possible lineage of the Baal Shem Tov. Anybody here descended from the Baal Shem Tov? I know I'm not, by the way, but for lots of reasons. But great, okay. But people do actually claim that lineage. Pausing here for a moment, that was like a very quick biographical introduction to the Baal Shem Tov. We're going to shift to kind of another issue of background in a second. So questions, comments, thoughts? Yeah. Well, he was very much a faith healer, not even kind of a faith healer. He's absolutely 100% going out and curing people of diseases. For sure, that's one of the stories that's told about him. So yes, he's a faith healer. He is he's able to sort of tell the future. He is able to communicate with the dead. He's got all of it. I mean, he is the whole tent, right? When you go to the circus, he's the whole tent. He's got it. Yeah. And again, I didn't mention this. Uh, the Baal Shem Tov wrote almost nothing in his entire life. There are a couple of letters that are attributed to him, a couple of like handwritten notes to individuals that those individuals said were direct letters from the Baal Shem Tov. Most scholars say that those are probably not actually from his hand. He didn't actually write anything down. Everything that we know about him is second hand, third hand, 10th hand, whatever. But starting with his disciples and the stories that are told about the stories that are told, about the stories that are told. And again, I mean, it was not exactly young in the day, but he lives to 60 years old. It's not like he, was Moses in that way. So yeah, Gary.
Maybe you just answered it, but how much of his reputation is derived from the acts of his disciples?
Well, his disciples certainly are going to lionize his reputation. The writing about him, and we're going to look at, we're going to study stories about the Baal Shem Tov, or ones that claim to be stories that he told. Certainly, his legend is built by his disciples, and then their disciples, and then their disciples, all the way to the current day, right? Those who have traveled in Tzfat, in the mystical city of Tzfat in the north of Israel, the Baal Shem Tov is peering out at you from everywhere, right? He's not the only Hasidic rabbi, but like he's the original. So people still create and invent stories about the Baal Shem Tov. Yeah. So to that end, he doesn't arise out of nowhere, right? The Baal Shem Tov is coming out of a very specific historical moment. And by historical moment, I don't mean like what happened immediately before he was born, but there's no question that there's really a lot of factors that are happening at the same exact time, leading up to and sowing the ground right for the Baal Shem Tov to have the attraction and success that he does. No question about it. He comes 50 years after, he's born 50 years after the Chmelnytsky pogroms. They are, in the Jewish imagination, they are without a doubt the worst violent attack, semi-genocide, by the way, to use the appropriate term, on the Jewish community. The worst attack on the Jewish community from the destruction of the Second Temple through to the 1650s. So 1648, the pogroms last for actually quite some time, perhaps even into 1649. They are led by a Ukrainian kind of leader slash, he is appointed as like a district representative, Bogdan Khmelnytsky, and he has an axe to grind, not just with the Jews, by the way. And from the Jewish standpoint, we tell this story about being an attack on the Jews, right? He's got an axe to grind with the Jews. He has an axe to grind with the Orthodox Christian Church. He has an axe to grind with the Poles. He has an axe to grind with like 5 or 6 other communities that he is going to gather as many local peasants, serfs as he can, and mobilize them into his army, because he's got an axe to grind. Specifically, the axe he's got to grind against the Jews is that in that time and in that region of the world, Jews were restricted in their professions, what they could actually do to make money, and oftentimes in the Christian world, as happened not just in the Christian world, but oftentimes in that region, the only thing that Jews were able to do would be to manage lands. So they were the people who came knocking on the door of the serfs to collect the money in order to pay it to the actual landowners, but they were essentially the face of the landowner. And nobody likes paying their rent. That's for sure. And the landowners, who were all Christian, certainly knew that nobody likes paying the rent. So if you want to send somebody to pay to collect the rent, why not send a Jew? So this actually leads to, and the numbers, I've read wildly different numbers. Scholars who say maybe it was as few as 20,000 Jews who were killed, and scholars who say maybe it was as many as 100,000 Jews who were killed, and then internal Jewish numbers, which are probably not scholarly, that say 200,000 Jews were killed in these pogroms. Whatever it was a substantial percentage of the Jews in those specific towns in the Poland-Ukraine region, right? And it spilled out from there around as well. So in some of those towns, the numbers of Jews killed were 50 to 60 to 70% of the population were massacred. So this was in its day really just the catastrophic moment. So Baal Shem Tov is born 50 years later, and it's a hard thing to say today, right? 50 years is not a long time to be away from a massacre. And so certainly in those days when I think time moved slower, 50 years was really not a lot of time. The other thing that comes up at that same time, and some scholars will say it's actually a direct outgrowth of the pogrom, and some will say that it was already happening. And actually, in dates, it was already happening, certainly. Shabtai Tzvi was a false messiah who was born in the Ottoman Empire, and he is kind of a charismatic teacher. And he comes to proclaim himself in the year 1648. Again, when the pogrom took place, there's a mystical tradition that puts it all together, and it says that very specifically in 1648, the Messiah is going to arrive. And Shabtai Tzvi decides he's the Messiah, and he is charismatic enough that he starts to get a whole Sabbatean movement around him. The Jewish community is part of them taken up by this. Sabbateanism was actually very, very popular, especially in the Ottoman areas. But Sabbateanism actually spreads into Europe as well. And Shabtai Tzvi is both lauded and then also attacked by the Jewish community. And then he is seen as a threat by the Turkish community. And he is effectively told he has a choice, basically. He can go into exile, he can be killed, or he can convert to Islam. And Shabtai Tzvi converts to Islam, which does not actually do anything to dissuade the Sabbatean movement that he's the Messiah. Now he's the Messiah and he's a Muslim and he's got all kinds of special privileges inside of the Ottoman lands and he's set up in a nice palace and stuff. He does wind up in jail at some points, but like Shabtai Tzvi is as a figure who rocks the world in the middle 1600s. And so much so that after his death, there are additional individuals who come up. In the Baal Shem Tov's day and age and in his region of the world, we get this guy, Jacob Frank, who is a Jew, who also believes himself to be the Messiah. And he was a follower, he was an admirer of Shabtai Tzvi, but Shabtai Tzvi's been dead for a couple of decades now. And so Jacob Frank declares himself the Messiah, and he's got some great thoughts and interests. This becomes what's called the Frankist movement. It spreads into Germany, it's in Poland, it's in Ukraine, and he attracts lots and lots of followers, in part because he has this interesting idea, Jacob Frank, that the way to actually bring about his revelation, God's revelation, that Jacob Frank is the Messiah, is that Jews have to get together and do everything they can to break every single mitzvah that they can possibly think of. And the Frankists, under Jacob Frank, do all kinds of interesting things, including eating all kinds of non-kosher foods, including all kinds of wild sex parties. Like there's like a whole sex cult, which Jacob Frank figured out was actually a great way to get followers. But his weird sex cult included incest. I mean, there was this whole thing about fathers having to have sex with their daughters. Jacob Frank was a weird individual. And he is gaining traction at the time when the Baal Shem Tov is coming around. And and there are some of the Baal Shem Tov's kind of lionizers who will say that that Baal Shem Tov and Jacob Frank had a debate, and that the Baal Shem Tov just destroyed him. That historically never happened, but it's a nice thought. But what it does mean is that for the Baal Shem Tov, he has seen the danger of messianism. He has seen that this, number one, is a great way to get yourself killed as a leader. And number two, also like makes people a little crazy, right? When they think that they've got the Messiah in front of them, they get a little crazy. And so the Baal Shem Tov, as part of his ideas, will not actually really press hard on messianism in a direct way. Which is weird to think about when we think about the Chabad Lubavitch movement in the last 40 years, which 30 some odd years ago was fully 100% convinced that Menachem Mendel Schneerson was the Messiah, and that even though he had died, he was actually in hiding and he was coming back and he was the Messiah. Today, the Lubavitch movement is generally, most Lubavitch are actually saying, well, it's not the case, and if it is the case, then we don't need to think about it until God wants us to think about it. There still are some in the Chabad Lubavitch movement who actually, it's one of the reasons why there is no Rebbe of the Chabad movement today, is because they can't agree between the factions who should take over, the ones who are loyal to the idea that Schneerson was the Messiah, and the ones who have said, it's time for us to move on. So that's one of the reasons why there is no Rebbe. Also because Schneerson never appointed a successor, which is one of the things that the people who point to him as the Messiah said, of course he doesn't need a successor. He's the Messiah. So anyway, but Baal Shem Tov, back to our subject at hand today, he is very much not going to be interested in messianism, or not direct messianism. Instead, right? So we're going to go through a number of primary ideas of the Baal Shem Tov, things that are key to the thoughts that are ascribed to him, the writing that's ascribed to him, and really these are all things that wind up becoming important foundation points of Hasidut writ large, right? Almost all of the things that he's preaching are going to become part of this very diverse movement that is Hasidism. So again, he is not big into Talmud. He is a great scholar of Tanakh, of the Hebrew Bible, but he is also clearly at least fairly well read in Lurianic Kabbalah, and it's pretty clear that his time in the Carpathian Mountains and his practices of prayer and such, and his theology are going to be based at least somewhat in Lurianic Kabbalah, and the concept of the Sfirot, the various emanations of God that represent different aspects of the divinity that can be combined and moved around and such like that. He is particularly going to harp on the idea that we call Shvirat HaKelim, the shattering of the vessels. Some people have studied this before, but this is the creation story on one foot according to Lurianic Kabbalah, right? And I can't do it on one foot. It's fine. But the creation story is that God wanted to create the world. God created a world, and then God poured God's self into the world. But the world could not handle the pouring in of God. And it was like when you pour hot liquid into a crystal vase, and it contracts and expands and it shatters. And that was what actually the initial creation of the world, before the world that we live in, was made out of. It was made out of this vessel that the holy sparks and light were poured into, shattered into infinite pieces in the world. Those infinite pieces in the world need to be put back together. That's actually originally what Tikkun Olam means, putting the pieces back together. And also, it's not enough just to put the pieces back together, but if God poured God's essence and holiness into the world in the form of light, that light shattered into all of the sparks, holy sparks that are everywhere in the world. And those holy sparks can be collected. And how do we collect them? Well, Lurianic Kabbalah would basically say you collect them through mitzvot. The Baal Shem Tov is going to come and say you can collect holy sparks anyway, because holy sparks are everywhere. There are holy sparks inside of everything that is, right? You just need to be able to actually get the wrapping paper off, the klipot. Those are the the rind of the orange, right? You got to peel it away, right? And then you can actually get to the holy spark, right? So Shvat Kelim, gathering of holy sparks. This is actually what an individual is supposed to be doing with their life. Baal Shem Tov says, and much of his theology is going to be based on that concept of revealing and collecting holy sparks. He'll use lots of other terms for it, but yeah. So another incredibly important term for Baal Shem Tov, and this is actually not really a Lurianic Kabbalah term, but one that becomes central to him, and certainly in a mystical way, is the concept of dvekut. In Ashkenazis, dvekus, right? Dvekut is clinging or adhesion to God. It is in some way making sure that you are actually just like hugging around everything of God and clinging to it with all of your might. And that you can do this actually not just with prayer. Certainly prayer can get you there, but you can actually cling to God in all kinds of different ways. You can cling to God while you're chopping an onion. You can cling to God while you are standing in the assembly line at the factory. You can cling to God while you're studying Torah for sure, but you can also cling to God when you are, I don't know, I'm making it up for him, but I'm going to say in the bathroom. So you can cling to God any way, doing everything, right? Whenever a man is occupied with material needs, his thought cleaves to God and he will be blessed, right? It's a concept that says, whatever you're doing, cleave to God while you're doing it. Dvekut. Dvekut becomes a word that you'll go again and again and again inside of all of Hasidic Judaism. He was opposed to ascetic practices. This probably also comes out of the Shabtai Tzvi and the Jacob Frank and all of that, but also the notion that so many mystical traditions are founded on this notion of, okay, let me starve myself until I have this vision, right? Let me gash myself and cause myself to bleed until the pain from the bleeding actually causes me to have some kind of mystic vision. Baal Shem Tov was opposed to ascetic practices of all kinds, and in fact, we know that to be one of the truly verifiable things we know, because one of his successors, Yaakov Yosef, who becomes really one of the most important writers to have firsthand experience with him, starts off as an ascetic and an opponent of Baal Shem Tov, and he thinks Baal Shem Tov is terrible and awful, and everybody should oppose him. And then he winds up becoming a convert to Baal Shem Tov, and then one of his principal students. But they have all of these debates about asceticism because Yaakov Yosef he starves himself. He's into the fasting aspect of trying to get to God. So just a couple more of the primary thoughts of the Baal Shem Tov, primary ideas here, right? So the next slide. Again, in the Carpathian Mountains, it's very clear that he spends time in ecstatic prayer. And what that means is he's not sitting in a pew with a prayer book in his hand, right? He's not looking at the words at all. Maybe he's making up the words. Maybe he's just talking to God. He is certainly singing. He is absolutely moving his body. He is an ecstatic physical movement, and when he starts praying with other people, that ecstatic physical movement turns into the dance that we associate with Hasidim. That's not just like, let's say, Mazel Tov to the bride and groom. That is, let's actually be involved in a physical movement with other human beings that transports us to a different mystical plane. And I've occasionally felt it, like in Hasidic dance, like on the men's side of the kotel and getting swept up in it, right? But more so than I'm usually a little bit worried I'm going to get trampled. But that chanting, swaying, dancing, all of those things, ecstatic prayer. He writes in his guide to prayer, if you see someone doing something strange during prayer, don't criticize them. They are actually getting somewhere, right? So this idea that like the prayers are not meant to be mumbled and they're not meant to be droned on, and they're maybe not even necessarily meant to be fixed as they are in a book. So Baal Shem Tov is ecstatic prayer. Nachman Abratzov is going to take that to next levels, and so hopefully Rabbi Plotkin is going to talk about that next week. So shuckling like this, yeah. So that definitely comes out of that tradition, right? And you know, some people will say there are Hasidim, that's Hasidut, and mitnagdim, oppositions. And what are the mitnagdim? They were Orthodox, ultra Orthodox European Jews who looked at all this and said, this is not the right way. Mitnaged means to oppose. They are the opposition. In modern parlance, they're often called Haredi, so they're like ultra Orthodox, non-Hasidic. And that is actually an extraordinarily large percentage of the ultra Orthodox community today, right? Just because you see somebody who's like dressed in black and with a shtreimel on their head and stuff like that, that does not make them a chassid. In fact, if you call them a chassid, you might be in for quite an earful, right? Because they might be a litvak, and they might be a mitnaged, and they might be a charedi, and they might be from a dot hamizrach, and they all of these other things that are patently not Hasidic, right? So if you go to a litvak shul, which Danny, your shul was Nusach Ari, right? Yeah. So that was ostensibly a Lurianic and so did people move when they prayed? Yeah. So if you go to a Litvak shul, to a Lithuanian anti-Hasidic shul, you will see people standing rod straight, right? People will not move it specifically to say we are not Hasidim. So yeah, that whole physical movement piece. But shuckling and davening, it's fairly universal in the ultra Orthodox and conservative, and even in some Reform worlds today, right? So like, and I will say, I do a little moving. By the way, feels great to move while you pray. Feels better than standing like, like that, right? So yeah, Marty. There are standardized prayers. They are dependent on what community you're in. So there's not a standardized prayer book across communities, but like the Jews of Ukraine and Poland, they would have had a fairly standardized service. Like you do this prayer, then this prayer, then this prayer. And these are the prayers you do in the morning and the afternoon and the evening. So those things are fairly standardized by this point. Yeah. Yeah, but I don't think that when Baal Shem Tov talks about ecstatic prayer, I don't think he's talking about tefillah or services. He's talking about davening, about connecting with God, maybe on the page, but probably off of the page. Yeah, yeah. About an active prayer life. Yeah, yep. Good. Others, and just the only other uh, primary idea that I wanted to bring forward is that a lot of people criticize Hasidic Judaism, like I said, and to an extent, it's because of how it presents itself as a simple faith, as something that anyone can understand, and its basic ideas. Well, Baal Shem Tov was actually a great proponent of real deep Torah study. He wanted people to study and to study deeply. He's certainly writing a lot about mystical ideas. He's very into gematria. All of his Torah commentaries are like picking apart words and assigning letters, numbers, and then making allusions between words because there are numerical equivalents or because there are numerical inversions or all kinds of things like that. So it is, I would say that Hasidism has an intellectual side to it, even as it's presented as something that could be really anyone's Judaism. Like you don't need to be deeply intellectual, but it doesn't bar you from being intellectual. But like I said, oftentimes it's really presented the opposite way. So yeah, yep. Yeah, Hitbodedut is a phrase I'm nearly sure 100% invented by Nachman of Bratzov. So you'll definitely talk Hitbodedut next week. Yep, yep, absolutely. Yes. Mitzvot help you to adhere to God. Yeah, dvekut happens through doing mitzvot. Baal Shem Tov is a great proponent of tzedakah. He is, you should give tzedakah. You should give directly. You should do it in ways that stretch yourself, right? So, like, yes, he is a in the world active Jew, despite the fact, and again, like, uh, there's not a lot that's known about the 15, 20 years or so that he spends in the mountains, but it seems to me like it's a withdrawal from society, and that kind of alone. Baal Shem Tov wants you to be in the world. He wants you to be interacting with other people. All of his stories are about being with other people. He traveled around lots. He does a lot of stories having to do with carriages and horses, because he spent a lot of time in carriages and horses, and for some reason the horse is always breaking down. Not being a big horseback rider, I believe that that's probably the case, that your horse breaks down every once in a while, right? So there's lots of stories of horses breaking down or going the wrong direction, or you fell asleep in the carriage and you wound up in the wrong place. So it's never the wrong place, by the way. It's always the right place. You think it's the wrong place, but yeah. So he is in the world. He's very much in the world. On the travel note, by the way, Baal Shem Tov writes, or at least we think, because other people said that he did, of his desire to travel to the Holy Land. He wants to get to Israel. He sets off multiple times to get to Israel, which was no small feat from Ukraine, Poland of those days, and he never makes it. Each time there's something that happens along the journey, and he says it's not the right time, or something goes wrong on the journey, and he turns back. So he never makes it in life to the Holy Land. Yeah. So Baal Shem was an appellation. It was, it meant somebody who was like a special teacher, and it was used well before him. Um, he takes on, and I'm not sure if others called him this or if he took it on himself, Baal Shem Tov. And what he's doing is, Baal Shem is somebody who has a good reputation. He's a master of name, right? And uh, and what he's doing is he's taking a phrase from Proverbs, Shem Tov Tov Mishem and Tov. I think Rabbi Weiss taught on it at Sukkot, actually, from Ecclesiastes rather. And he's turning the phrase, so he's taking Shem Tov, a good name, and joining it with Baal Shem, and so he's making like a hybrid thing as Baal Shem Tov. In his own lifetime, he was called the Baal Shem Tov. So I don't know. I don't know if somebody else said it of him, or if he just liked it. You know. Yeah. Great. Yeah.
Like Jewish religion for the peasants.
So a lot of people will say that Hasidism, spreads amongst the peasants, and there is no question. So the other regional world factor that was happening at the late 1600s into the early 1700s is it was a time of incredible economic downturn in those regions of Europe. People were poor, and they were getting poorer, and people's faith was being shaken by that level of poverty and suffering. So it was not just the pogroms, but it's also, your prospect for the future in terms of your own money and how you're living day to day. And so there weren't a lot of Jews who weren't peasants in that area. So yeah, I mean, but again, this idea that you didn't need to be an elite scholar to get it was one of the things that made it spread amongst the ordinary people. Yeah. Yeah. Marty. So into the 1800s and 1900s, Hasidic Judaism transfers over a little bit into the Sephardic areas. Today in Israel, you'll find Sephardic Hasidim. who are legitimately like there are I don't think there's any Sephardic Hasidic dynasties, but Sephardim who identify within what were Ashkenazi Hasidic dynasties. So yeah, so it's not you're not barred by not being Ashkenazi, but Hasidism is definitely an Ashkenazic uh, um, experience in the 17 1800s, and I would say into the 1900s. I think in modern day Israel is probably the only place where you start to see a crossover, which is interesting because Luria and the Lurianic Kabbalah is a Sephardic experience that informs it. So, like, Luria is Spanish. The Lurianic Kabbalah spreads much more so in the Arabic-speaking world, and so yeah, Karen.
Another Kabbalah, but
Yeah, there are. Lurianic Kabbalah is what most people think of as Kabbalah today. There are other Jewish mysticisms that are not Lurianic, that are not based on the idea of the shattering of the vessels. There are earlier Kabbalistic systems that are on all kinds of other things, and then there are later Kabbalistic systems that depart from Luria. So yeah, yeah, I'm trying to be specific because Baal Shem Tov was very connected in specifically to the teachings of Isaac Luria. Yep, the Ari. So yeah, okay, great. I missed one of my slides, so there we go. It was said over here, devotional joy, simcha. Whatever you are doing in your Judaism, let it be done with joy. The I grew up singing in youth group. Ivdu et Hashem b'simcha, ivdu et Hashem b'simcha, bo lefanav birnana, lefanav birnana, yalala 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 yalala. In Reform Youth Movement, I did not know. I was like totally doing Hasidut right there. It's an actual Hasidic nigun in that. Ivdu et Hashem, right? Even just like, if you're going to sing it and you're not praying, so you can't use Ivdu et Adonai b'simcha, which is what the Psalm 100 phrase comes from. But Ivdu et Hashem b'simcha, right? And so, and I love. And we would sway at Camp Harlem. Oh my gosh, this was like the greatest banger of Friday night song session, right? I didn't know it was Hasidic, but it most definitely is. But also it's as core phrases go, worship God in joy, right? Whatever you are, however you're serving God, whatever you're doing, do it with joy, right? Even bad stuff, even sins, teaches the best. Have some joy inside of them. And this is a beautiful commentary that I read. He said, why does a sin have a holy spark of joy inside of it? Because if you've sinned, then you've got another opportunity to make restoration and repentance. And so, hey, that sin just opened up a possibility for you to do something good. Hey, there's joy, so yeah. By the way, that's a very flawed logic. I'm not going to adopt that. That's not, but it's beautiful. It's nice. It's particularly, I think, spoke to people who might have seen themselves as like not worthy. Right? So, yeah, this is a beautiful, beautiful phrase. His admirers told especially about the light and fire that they imagined emanating from his person, and about his fiery way of reciting the prayers. Right. In the historical thoughts about the Baal Shem Tov, there's really no record of him actually being the rabbi of a synagogue. Like that's not what he was. And in fact, what's said is that he actually really didn't pray in the synagogue in Mezebeh. That he was not a fan of being inside of the synagogue. That they had like prayer circles and minions outside of the synagogue where he and his followers would go. But this synagogue, which is like a point of pilgrimage for Hasidim from all over the world, to go and visit this synagogue that's been restored. It's actually even been rebuilt. I think there's a copy of this synagogue somewhere in New Jersey. That's literally rebuilt to scale in New Jersey, the synagogue from Mezebeh, where the Baal Shem Tov spent the last 20 years of his life, right? But he actually never really went into that synagogue. So, like, okay, Fine, great. Yeah, it's not clear to me how he was received in the town itself, because the town was much, much larger. Not everybody there were followers of his, and it was a substantial Jewish community. So I don't know. That's a good question. Maybe he wasn't like literally outside, like they're out in the courtyard dancing while everybody's inside. You know, that would be provocative. But yeah, yeah. So great. Other questions, thoughts? Turning to the Zoom, folks. Good, 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 good. I'll look it up for you. Don't worry. We'll find it. We'll find it. That's cool. That's great. Good. Yeah.
Um, I'm just wondering of the elements of simcha that we experience in our prayer services and in other ways in our Reform congregation. Is that derived from him, or is that somehow otherwise organic in other ways?
I would make the argument sort of like this. I think that Hasidic Judaism winds up having a very direct impact on post 1960s, late 1960s American Reform Judaism, 1970s American Reform Judaism. It certainly has an impact in the camping movement, which then kind of brings elements of that back to the synagogue. So there's a line to be drawn from the Hasidic impulse, because early Reform Judaism, 1800s, 1700s, early 1900s, middle 1900s, was not, and in fact was probably in opposition as much as the Orthodox opposition was to Hasidism. You know, the early Reform Judaism was deadly opposed to all of this. My rabbi growing up, my Reform rabbi growing up, Rabbi Harold Weintraub of blessed memory, described himself as a Hasidic Reform rabbi. And everybody laughed when he said it. And I think about that a lot. You know, I wasn't very like close with him while I was growing up, but all of my memories of him are of joy, of being very connected and relaxed, and of actually being deeply, deeply spiritual. And those are not things that you could say of a lot of senior Reform rabbis in the early 1970s, most of whom were not relaxed, joyful, or spiritual, right? That was a very, and he called himself a Hasidic Reform Jew. He'd grown up Orthodox, but he called himself a Hasidic Reform Jew, and he really, really meant it. So yeah. And I think I would probably identify in that way. But yes, I think there are elements that come in that way. Yeah, yeah. March.
Area where a lot of the festivals in Ukraine. Is that related to this?
So Uman is actually where Nachman of Bratslav is sort of related to. It's not where he's buried, but it's where he prayed, and it's where he writes this mystical, strange saying. I'm going to let Rabbi Plotkin talk about Uman, and maybe he'll talk about the Rosh Hashanah pilgrimage, which was really interesting this year because they had all kinds of, every year they have all kinds of trouble on the Rosh Hashanah pilgrimage. But hopefully I'll suggest to him that he at least give you some video of the Rosh Hashanah pilgrimage to Uman in the Ukraine. But it's continued every year during the Ukraine war. So it's interesting. Yeah. Others. So I made allusion to this. I'm not going to really dwell on this next. There are Baal Shem Tov didn't write anything. Maybe he wrote some of the letters that people say he sent to them. Some of these individuals who are noted here on this next slide actually are among the individuals who say that they received a letter from him, but those are like minor works. What we know of the Baal Shem Tov's teachings and his stories and all of that really comes from secondary and tertiary sources. And some of those sources actually are 50, 100, 150 years after he lived. So, you know, the extent to which they are reliable, you know, take it with a grain of salt. But they are stories that are being told in his name to this day. So there are collections of Baal Shem Tov stories There is a collection called Shivchei Habesht, which are sort of like the supernatural wonder-working stories of the Baal Shem Tov. There's a collection of Baal Shem Tov on the Torah portion of the week. So like his individual thoughts about, grouped by Torah portions. There are stories of his travels and, the things that he did for people. So there's all kinds of different collections that come about over time. So to that end, I want to actually dig into a couple of stories of the Besht. So this first one, lovely, and it's from a great book Aronson Publishing, Orthodox Publishing House does, of the great Hasidic masters, and it lays them out kind of like by dynasty, and then gives you a little taste of each of them. It's a lovely book. So one day, in the company of a disciple, Baal Shem Tov was walking through a desolate region. "I am thirsty," lamented the young man. "Please find me some water. I'm dying of thirst." There was not a drop of water in sight. Master did not react. Then he said, "Have faith. When God created the world, he foresaw your thirst and prepared the water to quench your thirst." As he spoke, they came upon a peasant carrying 2 pails of water on his shoulders. "My boss has lost his mind," muttered the peasant. "This morning he sent me 3 miles into this desert to get water for no good reason. He must have gone mad." Buying a drink for the thirsty student, the Baal Shem said to him, "You see, when God created the world, he arranged this madness just so that you should quench your thirst." So, I mean, it's a simple story on the face of it, right? Cute story. The Baal Shem Tov, the master, the Baal Shem, he's got to be right, right? You're thirsty, you're thirsty. Oh, yeah, there's water right around the corner up here, right? But if you think about what the theological underpinnings of this story are, the idea is that the world is prepared with everything that ever was going to happen, even down to the idea that this student and he would be walking in this particular place on this particular day at this particular moment, and the student would be thirsty. And that we live in a world that God has arranged such as that those things will be taken care of. So that's a level of faith and trust, and part of the Baal Shem Tov's theology. Yeah.
Everything's predestined. Did you have any choice?
Okay. Is there any choice in it? So they had to decide to walk in that area that day. But if they didn't walk in that area, would the master have actually sent him on that day? Yeah. So again, everything is predestined and free will is given, as the Pirkei Avot says. Judaism and free will, we're not good friends, because we want free will. And back 2,000 years ago, when the Mishnah comes and says everything is foreseen and free will is given, 2,000 years ago we were pushing against it, saying like, no, I need to have individual agency. I don't want to live in a world where God has actually decided every single action. I am not a piece on a chessboard, right? But it would be nice to actually feel taken care of. So balancing both of those, I think. Yeah. Things are certainly chaotic for them. Yes, they are living in a time of chaos and upheaval, and I think in times of chaos and upheaval, perhaps like somebody who tells you that there's an order to the universe, they make better sense, or at least they give some comfort. That's not a good thing. But so before I go down that rabbit hole, so great. Other thoughts about the kvetchy thirsty student? No. Okay, it's like driving in the car with, "I'm hungry." Right around the corner, God has put a Wawa right there. So great. All right. So story number 2 from the same collection. The Baal Shem Tov said, "If you read in the Torah and you see the radiance of the letters, read them with love and fervor, even if you don't understand their meaning. God doesn't mind if you don't pronounce them correctly. It's the same as a toddler asking his father for something. He may mumble and stammer, but his Father takes delight in it anyway. And so it is with people. If you say the words of Torah with love, then God loves you, even if you mispronounce them. Um, yeah, it is nice. I'm gonna put it right up on the bima for all of our B'nai Mitzvah and all of our volunteer Torah readers, just to be like, that's okay. Like, it's all right. I make mistakes too. We all make mistakes. And if you're doing it with love, and if you're doing it with joy, right? God loves what you're doing, even if you are mangling it up to a certain point. I mean, like, let's just say, don't just make it up. No, I'm kidding. But yeah, yeah, but it'd be a good text to go to. Yeah, yeah, Marilyn.
Give the person with the pronunciation of the word. It's not an acceptance. It sounds like you have to pronounce it right.
You have to pronounce it right. Yeah, yeah, yeah. So like I always say in the shul that Pam grew up in, there were the kloppers, and if you were reading Torah or Haftarah and you made a mistake, there were these old guys go like that, right? And the first time I read Torah or Haftarah since my bar mitzvah was our Ufruf, and and it was before I knew I was going to rabbinical school at all, right? But I decided I'm going to prepare and learn the Haftarah. I mean, I knew Hebrew, but like I'm gonna chant the Haftarah, knowing that these guys are out there. It was but yeah, I mean, I think that that last piece is similarly about like if you're reading a piece of Torah or a piece of text and you just don't get it, that's okay. Do it with love, do it with joy, and your effort is actually what makes the most joy for God, not necessarily the outcome of mastery. So, yeah. And again, that, by the way, is an opposite of what will become the mitnagdim, the litvak, the yeshivish culture that will say, no, it is important that you pronounce every single nuance of every letter correctly. So yeah, 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 yeah. So yeah, so that might be that's a Hasidic versus mitnagid uh, dichotomy. Yeah, yeah, great. Um, Another story. This one goes 2 slides. So it's nope, nope, 1 slide. Oh, this was about his time in the Carpathian Mountains. And this, by the way, this comes from Martin Buber's collection called Tales of the Hasidim. And the third session with Rabbi Weiss is going to be on Martin Buber. Uh, Buber did more than probably any non Hasidic teacher for popularizing the idea of Hasidic Judaism. What he did, though, was he sort of took and repackaged the Hasidic masters in the really, really important, beautiful book called Tales of the Hasidim. It came out in 2 volumes, early masters, later masters. Most of the ones that you find today are like this thick, and they're just the 2 volumes as one. So it starts as it should with the Baal Shem Tov. It's told, the summits of the mountains on whose gentle slopes Israel ben Eliezer lived are straight and steep. In hours of meditation, he liked to climb these peaks and stay at the very top for a time. Once he was so deep in ecstasy, he failed to notice that he was at the edge of an abyss and calmly lifted his foot to walk on. Instantly, a neighboring mountain leaped to the spot, pressed itself close to the other, and the Baal Shem pursued his way. Can't let the Baal Shem Tov fall off the mountain. Nope, nope, nope. The mountains will move, right? Though the mountains shall move. Yeah.
Gentle slopes,
Yeah.
straight and steep.
Yeah, I guess. Again, this is Martin Buber's reworking of the story, right? And I've never studied about. I mean, Buber came from a scholarly and Hasidic family, so I'm not gonna like do too much on this, but because Rabbi Weiss is actually quite an authority on Martin Buber, who was the subject of her rabbinic dissertation, I'm gonna let her talk to Buber on the third session. So yeah, yes, but Buber oftentimes in Tales of the Hasidim, he is making a modernized version, at least in language, of Hasidic tales. So yeah, but again, because Baal Shem Tov didn't write it down himself, he deserves it. We're allowed to take his tales and twist them however we like, because if he wanted them to be preserved in a certain way, he should have been Shakespeare. So yeah, yeah, who wasn't really Shakespeare, but that's a different story. Okay, great. So the next is actually a two-slide, and it's a lovely one. It's told when Rabbi Israel ben Eliezer lived in the village of Koshlevitz, he frequently bathed in the stream. When it was covered in ice, he hacked an opening and dipped down into the waterhole. A peasant whose hut was near the stream once saw him wrenching at his foot, which had gotten stuck in the ice until the skin came off and blood spurted out. After that, the peasant watched the weather and put down straw for the Baal Shem to step on. Once he asked the peasant, "What would you like best, to get rich, to die old, or to be the mayor?" "Rabbi," said the peasant, "that all sounds pretty good." The Baal Shem had him build a bathhouse beside the stream. Soon it became known that the peasant's sick wife had bathed in the water of the stream and recovered from her ailment. The fame of the healing waters spread more and more until the doctors heard of it and made such a to-do about it in government quarters that the bathhouse was closed. But in the meantime, the peasant who lived near the stream had become rich, and all the people had chosen him for their mayor. He bathed in the stream every day and grew very old. Which would you like? To be the mayor, to grow old, or to become very rich? All of the above. How about all of the above, Rabbi? That'd be great. Sure, why not? It's good. Great. I wanted to give us one piece of Torah commentary from the Baal Shem Tov, and it is on this week's Torah portion. This week's Torah portion, Lech Lecha. We get the moment when Abraham goes up out of Egypt after the incident where he has had Sarah vouch that she's his sister and not his wife, and then Pharaoh takes her, and then bad things happen, and then Pharaoh has to send away Abraham with lots and lots of money, because that's how you make money. Okay. Vayal Avram miMitzrayim hu v'ishto v'chol asher lo v'lot imo hanegba. And Abraham went up out of Egypt. Besht says, "I heard a parable from my master." Oh no, actually, this is Yaakov Yosef writing what the Besht said. So he's attributing. I heard it from the Baal Shem Tov. "A road passed through a forest wherein a den of thieves lurked. Anyone traveling on the road was in great danger. Once 2 men went through the forest together. One was completely drunk and the other sober. The thieves attacked them both, robbed them, and beat them. They barely escaped with their lives. Afterward, they encountered a group of travelers. Some of the travelers asked the drunk if he had passed through the woods safely. He replied that he had, and that it was not dangerous at all. But when they asked him to explain his wounds and bruises, he could not. Others asked the sober man, and he told them at length just how they must be careful of the robbers. There is a difference between these two individuals. The sober one could warn others as to how to pass through quickly with guns, etc., but the drunk could not warn them at all." Concludes the Baal Shem Tov. This is how a tzaddik serves God, a righteous one. He knows the battle with the evil inclination and the robbers that lurk on the way. He realizes that the path is dangerous, and he lives in constant concern as to how to escape its trap. And he knows how to warn others of this dangerous thief, for he that increases knowledge increases suffering. This is not a case of the wicked person who rejoices in the pleasures of the evil inclination and declares, "Peace, there's no danger in this world." They both got beat up. They both got robbed. But one of them came away prepared to not only do better next time, but actually to warn others of the situation. So a parable, a lesson. Hasidic Judaism is going to invest lots in the parable. Parable is already an important part of Judaism. parable is an important part of Judaism before it becomes an important part of Christianity. It's actually one of the reasons why the parables of the New Testament are kind of so strong, is because the Jews of the pre-Christian era were talking in parables all the time. You can learn a lot from a story. So, yeah, great. So we have reached the moment when I show you where the Baal Shem Tov is laid to rest. That square building in the middle of the cemetery is the place where the Besht is entombed, and the gents in the picture below are inside of that small building. I don't know who else is buried there, but the grave marker that they're standing on top of is says, "Here lies Rabbi Israel Baal Shem Tov and Hakore. Oh, what's his name? Hakadosh, the holy Baal Shem Tov." So yeah, uh, in Mezheba, which I think is in the Ukraine. I'm pretty sure it may be in Poland today, but I think it's in Ukraine today still. So I don't know. We'll have to look at that on a map. But yes, Ukraine is certainly the areas of Ukraine that were sometimes Poland, sometimes Ukraine is the epicenter of early Hasidism. Yeah, yeah, great. Questions, reactions, thoughts, clarifications? Yeah. He was joyful. Well, I guess he was joyful. He came through. He said, I don't know how I got these injuries, but must have had a great time last night. I don't know where my money is, but yep, yeah. So okay, huh? Yes, yeah, yeah, yeah. That was his dvekut.
Yeah. Joy, joy.
You got to really dig for that joy after you get beat up and robbed. Yeah, but yeah, that's good. That's good. Great. Yes. Awareness. It's an awareness. The awareness of the joy comes. Okay, great. Yeah. Yeah. Gary.
So when he came about, there were all these other movements, and although some of them still exist, they certainly exist in very small numbers. What do you account for Hasidim, its incredible growth and persistence?
So Hasidism is developing in the 1700s at the same time that intellectual movements are also starting to spread across first Western and then Eastern Europe, at the same time when Jews are starting to have the ability to leave from shtetls and settle in cities, and also are starting to have the ability to study at universities. The interplay between Hasidism and the Enlightenment, or the Haskalah, is very clear. Some of these Hasidic masters actually interacted with some of the folks who were also developing modern thought, and Nachman of Bratzlov's one who likely, very, very likely did actually have some of those direct interactions. What is the reason for its spread and its popularity? Its spread and its popularity inside of Europe, I think, is based on the charismatic leader. The concept of the Rebbe, I think, spoke to people, really having somebody who you can turn to. And these Rebbes down the line are going to be people that, you go and you visit. Levi Yitzchak of Berdichev, you wanted to go to Berdichev to be at Levi Yitzchak's shul on the possibility that he might actually invite you to his table for Shabbat dinner, right? Which he invited strangers to his table, right? So like these powerful people whose reputation precedes them, and who people begin to look to, was very strong. But here's the thing. Almost the entirety of the Hasidic world is destroyed in the Holocaust. Almost the entirety. A few of these folks flee in the years before the Holocaust, but most of them don't. Some of them survive. the fact that Hasidic Judaism is still a vibrant, viable movement in the United States, in Europe, and certainly in Israel, um, you know, the faithful person to me wants to say it's nothing short of a miracle, right? The Hasidic dynasties that rebuilt themselves after the Holocaust, it's extraordinary, because they really literally rebuilt themselves from nothing, and the toll of the Holocaust on the Hasidic communities, was as great, if not greater, than for like secular modern Jews, many of whom had the thought and the means to flee. So and in the Hasidic world, it was still very traditionally focused, and necessarily, God will protect, God will take care. So yeah, yeah. So that's at least one piece. People do talk about that notion of the absolute miracle of the rebirth of Hasidism after the Shoah. So, yeah, yep,
My understanding is that there was friction between the Hasidic Jews with all the dancing and joy, etc., and what today would be referred to as Orthodox
yeah,
Judaism with a much more regimented.
yeah. That tension existed in that day. That tension exists to this day. And like I said, if you were in Israel and you see somebody in a black hat, do not assume they're a Hasid, because they will give you an earful and tell you which community they daven with and why they don't daven in these other communities. And yeah, those, and within Hasidic Judaism, by the way, the various sects are very different from one another as well, and sometimes even like fight within Hasidic Judaism. But there are, like, people of a particular sect of Hasidic Judaism tend to cluster around one another, so that, like, you get in Jerusalem certain neighborhoods that are one sect, right? It's why New Square in New York State, in upstate New York, is the New Skverer, from the town of Skver. The New Skverer Hasidim today in the town of New Square, if you are not a Skverer Hasid, you really don't belong in that town, and you have no business living there, right? So if you are Chabad, don't go moving to New Square, because you will not be welcomed. So yeah, 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 yeah. Mea Shearim is a whole mixture, because it's a big neighborhood. But Mea Shearim is Hasidic and Litvak and Nagdim, and yeah, it's a bit of everything. So inside of Mea Shearim, different shuls align with different communities. Yeah, Susan.
Are conducted in a big outreach.
No, no, that outreach piece, that's Chabad. The other Hasidic movements, by and large, are not looking to attract others to them. They welcome, but that outreach thing, that's actually not just Chabad. That is Chabad in the era of Menachem Mendel Schneerson, and not even at the beginning of Menachem Mendel Schneerson. Schneerson actually, like, comes to that later on. We probably should have done a fourth session just on Chabad, in all honesty. We didn't, but maybe some other day, maybe we'll invite one of our Chabad colleagues to actually come and get it from the kosher horse's mouth. So yeah, because I'm quite positive that several of them would be more than willing to do a session. So that might be cool. Uh, yeah, 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 yeah. It's a thought. Scheduling it might be a challenge, but yeah, it's a thought, because honestly, Chabad is that outreach thing, and so many things about Chabad set them apart from other Hasidic dynasties and movements. Yeah, yep. Shneur Zalman of Liadi, who's the Alter Rebbe, the founding Rebbe of Hasidic of Chabad Judaism, is a disciple of the Baal Shem Tov. He's like a generation and a half later, and initially he's sort of rejected by the Baal Shem Tov's circle, and then he becomes part of it. So yeah, but so he's only, he's a generation and a half removed from the Baal Shem Tov. Shneur Zalman. Shneur Zalman's the one who authors the Tanya, which is the central religious text of Chabad. Shneur Zalman? I don't think so. No, no, no. Schneerson's buried in New York in the Ohel. Yeah, yeah, yep, yep. Yeah, I don't know where Shneur Zalman is. Shneur Zalman's probably somewhere in Europe, if I had to guess. Yeah, yeah, yeah. Yes, the brownstone is was rebuilt outside Rehovot, feature too. Yeah, yeah, yeah.
And I don't know if it's true, I have not. There's always somebody singing by this.
Yeah. Lovely. Yeah. Cool. Great.
And
Uh-huh. Okay.
how God got man, destroys the world, saves these people. It's like the Hasidim from the Holocaust. Like, just what do you think of that idea? So even though
I think that's actually that probably is a Devar Torah that was probably given on Parshat Noach in one of these communities. You know, the idea of like being safe in the ark. Yeah, somehow. Yeah, yeah. If I had to get. By the way, here's what the Baal Shem Tov loved about Noah. He loved the idea that the ark, the word for ark in Hebrew is teva. Teva is also the word for an individual letter of the Hebrew alphabet. And so what is inside of the ark is what's inside of each and every letter, which means that inside of every letter is like all of what it would take to sustain creation. But that's a beautiful, like, you know, and but it all just comes from the same word being ark and letter. So yeah, great. Well, thank you all very much for coming tonight. Thank you for those who are on the Zoom. We're thrilled to have you. And for those who weren't,